The mirror above the sink had been cracked for almost 2 years. A long splinter ran through the middle, splitting Sibusiso's face into uneven halves each time he looked into it. Every morning, before the sun lit up the rooftops of Johannesburg's crowded townships, he stood there ironing his only good shirt, white with fading cuffs, while the kettle rattled on the stove behind him. It had become a routine stitched into his bones. Wake before his wife, iron the shirt, brush the shoes with an old toothbrush, rehearse his smile in the broken mirror. The flat they lived in was small, just 2 rooms and a balcony barely big, enough to hang their laundry, but Nomusa kept it spotless. She believed in light, even in dark places. There were soft curtains with sunflower prints, a plastic fruit bowl in the center of the table, and 3 framed photos on the wall. One was from their wedding, another from their first Christmas together, and the third was a photo of Sibusiso in his graduation gown. He looked proud in it, stiff-necked with joy. That photo had always been a promise to her, a quiet contract. A sign that he was going to make it, that her sacrifices, working double shifts as a nurse, skipping meals so he could study, had meant something. And at first, it seemed like he had kept that promise. When he told her he'd gotten a job at a logistics firm in Santon, she'd cried with relief. She had cooked him a special dinner that night, pap with lamb stew and fresh chakalaka. They'd danced in the living room afterward, barefoot and giddy, while the TV played an old Brenda Fassie song in the background. That night, Sibusiso had held her like someone who'd found land after drifting at sea. But the truth was different. The job had been real, for 3 weeks. A short-term contract, no benefits, no promise of extension. When it ended, they told him to leave his ID card and move on. He stood outside the building for nearly an hour afterward, holding his empty lunchbox like a shield. He hadn't told her. Couldn't. Something inside him, a fear, a shame too thick to name, clamped his throat shut. So he kept wearing the shirt, kept ironing, kept packing his lunch in the blue plastic container she loved. Every morning, he kissed her forehead and left like a man with purpose. But he didn't go to an office. Most days he walked, sometimes for hours, through streets filled with people who looked just like him, dressed in office clothes, pretending to belong somewhere. He sat in libraries and stared at notice boards. He applied for jobs on public computers that barely worked. He walked through malls and counted security guards, wondering if he should apply for something, anything, just to bring home a paycheck. At lunchtime, he sat on benches and ate his sandwich slowly, chewing without hunger, watching other men laugh into their phones, their confidence loud and careless. The lie grew heavier with each passing week, not in loud, dramatic ways, but in small, soul-wearing details. The bus fare that didn't exist anymore. The new shoes Nomusa wanted to buy him that he insisted he didn't need. The questions about his colleagues, which he always dodged with a vague shrug or a joke. He told himself it was temporary, that he would fix it, that once he got a real job, none of this would matter. But the days stretched into months, and still, there was nothing. Only rejection emails and silence. Sometimes he walked past construction sites just to see men working. The sound of drills, the thud of cement, bags, the shouting. It all reminded him of something solid, something real. But his hands stayed in his pockets, soft and clean, untouched by the kind of work that left bruises. He told himself he was meant for offices, that he hadn't studied for 5 years to carry bricks. But even that pride started to taste bitter, with time. Back at home, Nomusa began to notice small things, how he came home without stories, how he never talked about promotions or deadlines, how he never checked work emails. But she didn't say anything. She trusted him, loved him, believed in him in the quiet, unshakable way only wives do when they've prayed for a man through storms. And that trust made the lie feel even heavier. He sometimes sat in bed at night, watching her sleep, and wondered what would happen if he told her the truth. If he let the shame pour out of him like rain. But the thought of her disappointment was too much. He remembered how her face had lit up the night he said he got the job. He couldn't bear to dim that light, so he kept the routine. He wore the same shoes, folded the same shirt, left the house at 6:30 a.m. like clockwork. But inside, he was unraveling. Not with drama, but with a slow, quiet erosion. A kind of sadness that lived in the chest and made even sunlight feel heavy. And the mirror stayed cracked. The day it all started to fall apart began like any other. The morning sky over Johannesburg was washed in that soft gray light that comes before a summer rain. Birds hopped along the clothesline outside the balcony. Sibusiso stood in front of the cracked mirror again, tying his knot carefully. Over time, he had perfected the art of appearing normal. The routine wasn't just habit anymore, it was armor. The small details saved him. A quick sip of tea, a quiet, "see you later," to Nomusa as she packed her lunch in foil, the soft click of the front door behind him. Each action was a stitch that held his story together. But that morning, something felt different. A stillness lingered in the air, the kind that made you check over your shoulder even when no one was there. Sibusiso walked the familiar route, past the yellow wall with the "Jesus is King" graffiti, past the hair salon where women laughed too loud, past the newspaper man who never remembered his name. He walked slower than usual. Something inside him, though quiet, was uneasy. At the library, he logged in like always. The same seat, the same browser, the same websites. Each job posting he clicked felt like déjà vu. Minimum 5 years experience. Own transport required. Must be fluent in Afrikaans. He kept scrolling, even though his heart wasn't in it. His eyes burned. His fingers hovered above the keyboard without pressing. Around him, the world carried on. Students typed essays, old men read newspapers, and security guards paced like lions in cages. The library was warm, but Sibusiso felt cold. At lunchtime, he didn't eat. He walked, this time toward the edge of the city, past the polished glass buildings of Sandton. He sometimes liked to go there, just to feel like he was part of something, bigger, cleaner, more ordered. He stared up at the mirrored windows of tall offices and imagined himself behind one of them. Maybe in a meeting, maybe with a name badge on his chest, maybe with something to actually do. But the reflections looked back at him like they knew, like they could see through the ironed shirt and empty briefcase. He sat on a public bench under a jacaranda tree. Purple petals covered the pavement like a spilled secret. The weight on his chest had grown heavier over the past few weeks. Not because of anything Nomusa said, but because of what she didn't say. Her silences had changed. They were softer, but sharper. She had stopped asking about his work friends. She had stopped checking the news for stories about his company. She had even stopped celebrating payday because it never came. He had pretended to transfer money to her e-wallet, claiming his company had moved to monthly payments. She never questioned it, but she had started cooking more rice and fewer meats. Quiet adjustments. Quiet doubts. That afternoon, the clouds thickened. The first drops of rain fell like warnings on the concrete. Sibusiso didn't move. He watched the world blur under the drizzle and wished he could disappear into it. Back at home, something unexpected was waiting. Nomusa had come home, early. She never did. Her shifts at the clinic usually ended after dark, but today, the gate was already unlocked when Sibusiso arrived. He paused. His heartbeat quickened. His mind raced. Had she found out? Had someone said something? He stepped inside, rehearsing a smile. But before he could speak, he saw her face. Not angry, not suspicious, just tired. "I wasn't feeling well," she said, rubbing her temples. Headache, relief, but also guilt. It hit him like a slap. She was working, herself thin, sacrificing her health, trusting him. And he was building his day around lies. He offered to make her tea. She nodded. They sat on the couch, the hum of the fridge filling the silence. For the first time in weeks, he looked at her properly. Her eyes were dull, and her shoulders slumped like someone carrying too much for too long. Later that night, he lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy. The cracked mirror in the bathroom seemed to echo in his mind like a broken truth he couldn't fix. He imagined what it would be like to confess, to say, "I've been pretending. I've been lying. I have no job." He imagined her walking out. He imagined her crying. But most of all, he imagined the silence, the deep, disappointed silence that would come from her soul, and yet he knew the silence had already begun. It was growing between them like a wall, slowly, quietly, painfully. The next morning, the routine continued, but something shifted. Nomusa watched him more closely. Her goodbye kiss lingered longer than usual. Her eyes searched his face for something, anything, but he gave her the same practiced smile and walked out the door again. He didn't know it yet, but that was the last day the lie would live. The sun rose slow and soft that Thursday, throwing pale golden light over the rooftops of Hillbrow. Birds chirped from the wires like they knew no secrets. In their small kitchen, Nomusa was already dressed for her half-day shift at the clinic. She moved slower than usual, her eyes following Sibusiso as he buttoned his shirt like he had every morning for 2 years. She handed him a packed sandwich. "Try eat before 12, she said gently. "You've been skipping." He nodded, avoiding her eyes. He hated how good she still was to him. As he stepped out the door, a strange lightness filled his chest. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was the way her voice had sounded, soft but steady. Or maybe, deep down, he felt the air shifting before a storm. That morning, he didn't go to the library. He walked aimlessly through the streets for an hour. Every step felt heavier. At one point, he stopped near a small playground and sat on a rusted swing. Children weren't out yet. It was too early, so the place was quiet, almost frozen in time. He stared down at his polished shoes, now dusted with street grit. Everything about him was theater, a performance played to an invisible audience. And he was exhausted. The clouds were already gathering by the time Nomusa arrived at Santon. She had taken a taxi straight from the clinic, dressed in her nurse uniform, her hair tied back in a bun. Her hands trembled just a little as she stepped into the lobby of the building where Sibusiso claimed he worked. It was her day off tomorrow, and she had decided, without warning him, that she would surprise him at lunch. She carried a plastic container of warm pap and oxtail stew, his favorite. The receptionist smiled as Nomusa approached. "Hello, can I help you?" "Yes," she said, adjusting the container in her hands. "I'm looking for Sibusiso Dlamini." "He works in logistics." The woman blinked. "Logistics?" "Yes. 4th floor. He's a manager." The receptionist looked at her screen, brows furrowed, tapped something, looked again. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said finally. "There's no one by that name in our directory." Nomusa's heart slowed. Maybe he's listed under a contractor? Or maybe they moved floors? The woman shook her head. "We have no Sibusiso Dlamini in this building. Are you sure this is the right place?" Nomusa didn't speak. She felt her hands grow cold around the warm container. She stepped out of the building, the heat outside hitting her like betrayal. Traffic hummed, taxis hooted. But the sound was distant, like she was underwater. Her feet moved without thought. She walked 2 blocks before sitting on a concrete bench beside a fountain. The container of food still sat in her lap. The stew was beginning to leak through the plastic. That's when the truth hit her. Not all at once, but in small, echoing pieces, the missed paydays, the quiet silences, the stories that never added up. He had lied. All this time, the man she loved, the man she sacrificed for, had been living in a story he built from fear. And suddenly she wasn't angry. She was hollow at home. She placed the untouched food in the fridge. Then she sat on the edge of their bed and waited. Not with fire, not with tears, but with something deeper. The ache of someone realizing they were not part of the story they thought they were living. At exactly 5:45 p.m., Sibusiso unlocked the eye. Door rehearsed smile already in place. But when he stepped in, he found her sitting still, hands folded, her nurse's bag still by the door. He froze. Their eyes met. No words. Only the kind of silence that crushes a person's breath. Nomusa stood, slowly, walked toward him. Her voice was calm but low, like thunder wrapped in silk. "I went to your office today." His whole body seemed to collapse inward, like a house with no foundation. She didn't need to say more. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Her eyes said everything. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He wanted to fall to his knees, to vanish, to disappear into the tile floor and never be seen again. Instead, he turned away, silent, still holding his lunchbox. And that's when she did the last thing he expected. She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around him, pressed her head to his chest, and whispered, "Come home." He couldn't breathe. The tears came fast, then faster. The kind of weeping that came from a place beneath shame. From a wound he'd been hiding for far too long. "I wanted to be the man you married," he said finally, voice breaking. "You still are," she answered. "But only if we stop lying." That night they sat in silence on the floor. No food, no TV, just truth between them. He told her everything: the job loss, the walking, the libraries, the fear. And she didn't judge. She only listened. Because love, real love, doesn't just survive storms. Sometimes it rebuilds after them. Morning came without its usual theater. There was no ironing, no rehearsed smile, no briefcase pretending to hold plans and paper. Just soft light spilling across their small bedroom, washing over the peeling wall paint and the silent photograph of their wedding still hanging, crooked but proud. Sibusiso sat on the edge of the bed, fingers interlocked, eyes cast downward. He looked thinner in the light, smaller somehow, like the lie had been inflating him all this time, and now that it was gone, he had shrunk to his real size. But there was something else, too. Something quiet but new. Stillness. Not the stillness of shame, but of truth. Nomusa was already awake. She didn't speak much that morning. She moved through the kitchen in her usual way, boiling water, arranging mugs, folding a cloth to cover the leftover stew from last night. But every now and then she glanced at him, and her eyes didn't hold bitterness, only tired grace. That day, Sibusiso didn't leave the house. Instead, he opened his laptop and began looking for real help. Not just jobs, but programs. Free ones, community-led initiatives for job seekers, mentorship groups, skills training. He applied to a government-sponsored program focused on upskilling unemployed youth in business and entrepreneurship. It didn't promise a job, but it offered something more valuable: tools. And for the first time in a long while, Sibusiso moved with intention, no longer pretending, no longer hiding. Meanwhile, Nomusa had started baking. It began with a single loaf of banana bread, the way her late mother used to make it, dense and soft with a pinch of nutmeg. She posted a picture on her community WhatsApp group, offering free samples for anyone nearby. Within an hour, 3 women had messaged her. By evening, she had 2 orders for weekend delivery. The stove in their small kitchen became the center of something new, a kind of altar. She baked between her clinic shifts, her apron dusted with flour, her hands always busy, her lips humming to old Miriam Makeba songs on the radio. The smell of sugar and cinnamon replaced the weight of sadness in their home. It was not wealth. It was not luxury, but it was honest. Sibusiso helped where he could. He washed the mixing bowls. He typed labels. He learned how to tie ribbons around the boxes. They worked in silence mostly, but it was a silence filled with togetherness. Not avoidance. Each task they did side by side was a thread, slowly stitching the torn fabric of their marriage. Weeks passed. Sibusiso's training began every Monday and Wednesday at a dusty municipal building 2 taxi rides away. He wore jeans now and a plain shirt. He carried a notebook filled with scribbles about budgeting, marketing, and digital tools. He sat in classes beside teenagers and ex-security guards and mothers who had never seen the inside of an office. And for once, he didn't feel shame, only humility, only hope. Nomusa's orders grew, first friends, then strangers. A local cafe owner asked to taste her lemon cakes. Soon she was baking in batches. She began saving for a second oven. Not much, just coins in a jar labeled "Next Chapter." But every coin mattered. Their nights changed too. There were no more secrets, no more fake reports about office politics. Instead, they talked, sometimes about dreams, sometimes just about the day, sometimes about nothing. But they talked, and in those talks they began to understand something powerful, that love isn't measured by success or status, but by how gently you hold each other through failure. One Saturday morning, as Nomusa packed cupcakes into white boxes for delivery, Sibusiso sat watching her, sipping tea. "You're becoming a businesswoman," he said softly. She smiled without looking up. "We're building something, both of us." That afternoon, they walked hand in hand to the park, something they hadn't done in years. Children played under the jacaranda trees. A street musician strummed a guitar under the shade. The air smelled like dust and warm bread. And for this first time in a long time, Sibusiso didn't feel like a fraud. He felt like a man standing at the start of something true. There were still hard days, still moments where shame rose up like a ghost and whispered in his ear. But now, when it did, he had something stronger than pride to lean on. Truth. And truth, they had learned, rebuilds what lies destroy. Not all at once, not easily, but fully. One evening, as they closed the windows against the wind, Sibusiso caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. The crack was still there, still splitting his reflection in two. But this time he didn't flinch. He looked straight at it, straight at himself, and smiled.